There was a time when I explained everything. Every silence, every decision, every absence. I wrapped them in words, believing that if I could just make people understand, peace would follow. But it never did. The more I tried to explain, the more I felt unseen. Words that were meant to build bridges only built walls. And one day, without meaning to, I fell silent, not because I had nothing left to say, but because I finally realized that truth does not live in explanation. It lives in presence. It began after a conversation that left me hollow. I remember watching someone twist my words into shapes I didn't recognize. My intentions dissected and rearranged until they resembled something cruel. I tried to correct it, to fix it. But each sentence I spoke seemed to tighten the knot rather than loosen it. When the call ended, I stared at the phone in my hand and felt the strange calm that follows surrender. I had said everything I could. Yet nothing had changed. That's when I saw it, the quiet truth beneath the noise. Most people do not listen to understand. They listen to confirm. Their minds are not open doors waiting for your words to walk through. They are mirrors, reflecting back only what fits their story. And once you see that, you stop trying to be heard in places built to echo. You stop throwing your piece into conversations that were never meant to hold it. There's a moment, sharp and irreversible, when you realize that explaining yourself has become a form of begging. Begging to be seen, to be understood, to be forgiven. But understanding is not something you can demand. It's a gift the listener chooses to give. And some people will never offer it, because doing so would require them to confront the limits of their perception. It's easier to misunderstand you than to question themselves. I remember walking through the city that night, lights flickering in windows, voices rising from open bars, taxis hissing over wet asphalt. Everyone seemed to be explaining something to someone. Apologies, justifications, small defenses for invisible wounds. The whole world talking, no one really hearing. I felt like I had stepped outside the noise for the first time. It was terrifying at first, that silence. It felt like exile. But slowly, it began to feel like home. That's the paradox. Silence begins as loss, but ends as liberation. You stop explaining because you finally understand that the people meant to see you already do. And those who don't, never will, no matter how carefully you arrange your sentences. When you no longer chase understanding, you start to see how much energy you've been giving to illusions. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change. But until then, I follow my own nature." He did not write, "I will argue endlessly until everyone agrees." The Stoics knew that peace does not come from convincing the world. It comes from mastering the self. Explaining yourself can feel noble. It feels like honesty, like clarity. But sometimes it's just fear disguised as reason. You keep speaking because silence feels like defeat. You think if you stop talking, they'll win. But silence isn't surrender. It's self-respect. You no longer need the world to validate your inner truth. You're no longer negotiating with misunderstanding. There's a strange power in letting someone be wrong about you. You stop fighting ghosts and start tending to what's real, your actions, your conduct, your peace. Seneca called it the great calm of the soul. He warned that noise, especially the noise of our own justifications, steals that calm. I learned that the hard way. I used to walk away from arguments replaying every word, wishing I had said something smarter, sharper, kinder. But what I really wanted wasn't to win, it was to be understood. And then I realized something brutal. You cannot be truly understood by someone who is still at war with themselves. They will always project their battle onto you. So now, when misunderstanding comes, and it always does, I no longer rush to defend. I let the silence stand. It speaks a language older than words. It says, "I know who I am." You can think what you must. It's not arrogance, it's clarity. The kind that comes when you stop performing your truth and start living it. Because words are fragile things. They can be twisted, doubted, erased. But the way you live, the way you carry your composure through conflict, that's unarguable. That's where the real explanation lives. Still, the hardest part is the beginning. When you first stop explaining, the silence feels like exposure. You'll think, they don't understand me. They think I'm cold or cruel. You'll want to send one more message, one more clarification. Don't. Let them believe what they need to. Let misunderstanding do its quiet work. It is not your enemy, it is your boundary. Over time, that boundary becomes a sanctuary. You start to see how peace expands when it's not constantly being bargained away. You begin to value clarity over approval, solitude over noise. You realize that the truth doesn't need a defense. It just needs consistency. The storm will pass. The truth will remain standing. And in that stillness, something shifts. You begin to live for understanding, not of others, but of yourself. You become anchored, unshakable. The world may misread you, misquote you, misjudge you, but it can no longer move you. Because the moment you stop explaining, you stop depending. It's strange, isn't it? The thing we fear most, being misunderstood, is often the door to our deepest strength. Once you walk through it, you stop craving validation. You stop measuring your truth by the world's applause. You realize that the people meant to understand you will feel you, even in your silence. And the rest, they were never your audience to begin with. So the next time you feel that pull, that urge to clarify, defend, justify, remember this. Every explanation you give to someone unwilling to listen is a theft of your peace. Every silence you keep in wisdom is a return to your power. If this message resonates with you, take a deep breath and let the noise fade. In that quiet space between what you want to say and what you choose not to, that's where real strength lives. And if you've ever felt exhausted from explaining yourself to people who never truly listened, this channel is for you. Subscribe, stay with me, and together we'll rebuild the kind of calm the world keeps trying to take away. Now let me ask you something, and answer honestly in the comments below. When someone misunderstands you completely, what do you do? A. Try to explain until they finally see your side. B. Stay silent and let your actions speak for you. Comment A or B below. Your answer might tell you more about your peace than you think. I used to believe that if I could just find the right words, everything broken could be repaired. Every conflict could be smoothed over. Every misunderstanding could dissolve into clarity. That belief shaped how I lived, always explaining, always defending, always searching for the sentence that would make someone finally see my heart. But the more I tried to make others understand me, the more I realized I was the one disappearing. It's strange how easily we become prisoners of our need to be understood. We carry it like an invisible burden, this constant urge to justify who we are, why we said no, why we walked away. Every explanation becomes a small negotiation, a trade between our truth and someone else's comfort. We give pieces of ourselves just to keep the peace, never realizing that peace built on approval is never real. I remember a time when I stayed in conversations long after my soul had left them. I kept trying to fix what was never mine to fix, to prove that I meant well, to correct the stories told about me. I thought silence would make me look guilty, that stillness would make me look weak. So I kept talking. I rehearsed my explanations like a script, thinking if I said it with enough patience, enough honesty, it would reach them. But it never did. It never can, because explanation cannot penetrate a closed heart. Most people do not want the truth. They want confirmation that their view of the world is still intact. They want their assumptions to survive. To understand you would mean reevaluating themselves, and that's something very few are ready to do. So when they misunderstand you, it's not an accident. It's protection for them, not for you. It's easier to keep you small, wrong, or misunderstood than to confront their own contradictions. I used to take that personally. I thought being misunderstood meant I had failed to express, failed to connect, failed to be clear. But then I started noticing something. Even the wisest voices in history were misunderstood. Socrates was condemned for corrupting minds. Marcus Aurelius was mocked for being too detached. Seneca was accused of hypocrisy for being wealthy. Epictetus, born a slave, was dismissed by the free men who needed his lessons most. If even those who lived with integrity were twisted by perception, why did I think I would be an exception? It was then that I began to see misunderstanding not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Every time someone distorted my truth, it showed me how much I still craved control. I wanted them to see me the way I saw myself. I wanted them to recognize my intention, to meet me in fairness. But life isn't fair in that way. People only meet you as deeply as they've met themselves. And once you accept that, you stop forcing connections that were never meant to hold your truth. There's a quiet pain in that acceptance, a mourning of sorts. You grieve the version of them you imagined, someone who could meet your honesty with honesty. But beneath that grief, a freedom begins to bloom. You start to see that their misunderstanding says more about where they are than who you are. It reveals the limits of their perception, not the worth of your soul. And when you see it clearly, something within you stops reaching. You stop throwing your words into a void that never answers. You start saving them, not out of pride, but out of wisdom. You learn to let silence be your response, not as withdrawal, but as protection of energy, of dignity, of peace. It's a kind of maturity the world rarely celebrates, to let go of the need to be understood, to stand calm in the storm of misinterpretation. To know that clarity doesn't always require explanation, and truth doesn't demand an audience. Marcus Aurelius said, "Be indifferent to what makes no difference," and perhaps misunderstanding belongs to that category. It makes no difference to the truth. It only tests whether you trust it enough to stop defending it. I've learned to stop arguing with the noise, to let people have their stories if they need them. Because every minute spent trying to rewrite their version is a minute taken from living your own. And maybe that's what the Stoics meant by freedom, not the absence of judgment, but the refusal to be defined by it. The day you stop explaining yourself is the day you begin to see who's really listening and who never was. There came a point when I stopped asking why they misunderstood me and began asking why I needed them to understand it all. That shift changed everything. I realized that the urge to explain wasn't really about truth, it was about fear. The fear of being unseen, the fear of being wrong, the fear of being alone in what I knew to be right. But clarity does not need an audience, and truth does not dissolve in silence. It waits, it endures. I started to notice something strange in people who never demanded to be understood. They carried a calm I couldn't explain. They didn't argue, didn't defend, didn't chase closure. They let misunderstanding pass through them like wind through tall grass. Their peace wasn't fragile, it was deliberate. I wanted that kind of peace. The kind that isn't disturbed by noise. The kind that comes from knowing that silence is not a retreat, but a response. One morning, sitting by the window with the first light spilling over the rooftops, I realized that explaining yourself is a form of clinging. You hold on to the hope that someone will finally see what you see, feel what you feel, validate what you know. But detachment begins when you stop gripping the need to be understood. When you accept that not every story needs a narrator. Some truths are meant to be lived, not told. That morning, I read Seneca again. He wrote that it takes more courage to hold your tongue than to speak your pain. I understood him differently this time. Silence isn't about suppressing truth. It's about refining it. You learn to separate what is essential from what is merely emotional. You realize that not every reaction deserves a response, and not every wound needs to be shown. The Stoics weren't cold, they were clear. They mastered the art of restraint, not because they didn't feel deeply, but because they refused to let feeling rule them. I began practicing it in small ways. When someone questioned my decisions, I didn't rush to justify them. When others projected their stories onto mine, I didn't correct them. I let the silence stand. It wasn't easy at first. Silence can feel like invisibility. It can feel like giving up. But over time, I noticed something subtle. I was no longer carrying their misunderstandings inside me. Their opinions stayed where they belonged, with them. My peace, for the first time, belonged to me. Epictetus once said, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." At first glance, it sounds harsh, almost humiliating. But it's liberating. To be content with being misjudged is to escape the tyranny of perception. You no longer shape yourself to fit someone else's understanding. You act from principle, not approval. You speak only when your words can serve, not when your ego demands to be heard. That is the essence of Stoic freedom, detachment, not indifference. It's not that you stop caring. It's that you care differently. You stop trying to control how you are seen and focus instead on how you live. Your silence becomes a boundary, not a void. It says, "I will not waste the sacred on the unwilling." And with that understanding, the noise around you begins to fade. The world keeps talking, debating, performing, but you move quietly through it, grounded, steady, unshaken. That is when you realize that peace was never something to explain. It was something to become. The more I practiced silence, the more I began to see what it revealed. At first, I thought silence was a way to protect my peace, to avoid conflict, to rise above the noise. But over time, I discovered it did something far more profound. It became a mirror. It reflected everything that words used to hide. When I stopped explaining, I saw people for who they really were. Their reactions, their discomfort, their distance, all of it spoke louder than anything they could have said. Silence didn't create distance, it exposed it. There was someone once who accused me of being cold, distant, unfeeling. They said my quiet was manipulation, my stillness indifference. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say, "You mistake peace for apathy," but I didn't. I let the silence stand between us like a glass wall. It was painful, yes, but it was honest. And in that quiet, their words began to echo back to them. I watched as they confronted their own reflection, their insecurity, their projection, their need to provoke a reaction just to feel seen. Silence didn't punish them, it revealed them. That's the thing no one tells you about silence. It's not empty. It's heavy. It carries truth the way water carries reflection. You can look into it and see what's there, but only if you're willing to face it. Most people aren't. They confuse the discomfort of silence with hostility because they fear what it might show them. The Stoics understood this long before we did. Epictetus taught that when someone offends you, it's not the act that disturbs you, but the judgment you attach to it. When you respond with calm, you deny them control over your inner world. I remember a day when someone spread lies about me. The old version of me would have rushed to defend, to set the record straight. But that day, I stayed still. I felt the sting of injustice, but beneath it, I also felt clarity. The truth didn't need my defense, it needed my consistency. Over the next weeks, I said nothing. I let my actions speak, and slowly, the noise burned itself out. People eventually saw what was real without me saying a word. I realized then, silence is not weakness. It's endurance. It allows truth to outlast gossip, dignity to outshine accusation. Still, the hardest part wasn't being silent with others. It was being silent with myself. In stillness, you have to face the thoughts you once drowned out with justification. You see your fears, your pride, your desire to be liked. The silence shows you the parts of you that still crave validation. It's humbling, but that humility is what transforms you. It's how strength becomes grace. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "To bear misunderstanding with patience is the mark of greatness." I used to think greatness was about doing, building, proving, achieving. But now I see it's about enduring, standing still while others project their noise onto you, trusting that the truth will survive without your interference. The quiet doesn't erase pain, it refines it. It burns away everything false until only clarity remains. Sometimes I think the world fears silence because silence holds a mirror too clean. It forces honesty. It strips away the illusions we cling to. But when you can stand before that mirror unflinching, when you can face the reflection of who you are without words to defend you, that's when you finally become untouchable. Not because you're above others, but because you've stopped needing to be understood by them. And that is when silence stops being a shield and becomes a light, soft, steady, and impossible to extinguish. Over time, I began to understand that silence isn't the end of the story. It's the point where the story begins to tell itself. What follows silence is not emptiness, but a deeper kind of truth, one that no argument could ever uncover. There's a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when you realize you no longer need to win. You no longer need to prove, or correct, or be seen as right. You simply are. And that being carries a power louder than words. I remember sitting by the sea one afternoon, watching the waves move with a rhythm so certain, so unbothered. No wave tried to explain its shape, no tide defended its return. They came, they went, they existed in perfect understanding with the forces that shaped them. And it struck me, that's what peace looks like. Not the stillness of inaction, but the stillness of acceptance. The ocean doesn't argue with the shore. It meets it, over and over, and still remains itself. That's what silence becomes when you live it long enough. Not a pause, but a pulse. A way of breathing through misunderstanding without losing your essence. When someone misjudges you, you don't need to correct them. When they doubt you, you don't need to convince them. You understand that what's real doesn't beg to be believed. It just is. Freedom begins the moment you stop performing your truth for others. You stop editing yourself to fit someone's comfort. You stop twisting your peace into shapes that make other people feel safe. You realize that misunderstanding can no longer imprison you, because you no longer need to escape it. The cage only exists if you keep rattling it. There was a time when I thought silence was a strategy, a way to appear calm, to seem wise. But now I see it's something deeper. Silence is an act of love, not for others, but for the self. It's how you honor your boundaries. It's how you say, without saying, my energy is sacred and not everyone deserves access to it. You stop explaining not because you've given up on others, but because you've finally remembered yourself. In that remembering, something beautiful happens. Life becomes lighter. The opinions of others lose their gravity. You stop being pulled by misunderstanding and start being moved by purpose. You begin to live not as a reaction, but as an intention. You do what's right because it's right, not because it's seen, liked, or applauded. That's what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. The best answer to noise is calm. The best answer to lies is consistency. The best answer to misunderstanding is time." And with time, the truth always reveals itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It simply stands, unshaken, waiting for the noise to fade. The people who are meant to understand you will, eventually. The rest were never listening to begin with. You learn that not every story needs to end in reconciliation. Some endings are simply releases, quiet, clean, and necessary. That's what silence teaches. How to walk away with grace. How to let go without bitterness. How to close the door without slamming it. It's the art of preserving dignity in a world obsessed with defense. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing, not out of indifference, but out of mastery. You no longer need to shout the truth when you are the truth. So when you reach that moment, when you feel the familiar pull to explain, to fix, to be understood, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, Who am I doing this for? If the answer isn't peace, it isn't worth saying. Let silence do what words cannot. Let misunderstanding teach you patience. Let restraint reveal your strength. Because the person who can remain calm in a storm no longer fears the weather. And maybe that's the real Stoic victory, not to silence others, but to master the noise within. To walk through life unbothered, not because you don't care, but because you finally know what truly matters. If this spoke to something in you, if you've ever felt tired of explaining yourself, tired of being misread, tired of giving away your peace, then take this as your reminder. You don't need to be understood to live in truth. You just need to live it. Every day, quietly, firmly, relentlessly. Let your actions speak where your words no longer need to. If this message resonates with you, stay here with me. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking this path together, toward stillness, toward strength, toward the kind of peace that doesn't depend on being understood, but on understanding yourself. Because that's where freedom begins.